I'm a risk taker. I just jumped in, and it was a little bit young, wild, and crazy, but that's how I learned.
Okay, so here we are. This is the I Don't Know What It's Called podcast.
It's called the first podcast.
Yeah, and I'm calling it Start Before You're Ready because I'm not actually ready. And I believe that in order to start making content, you don't have to be ready. You just need to start, and then you perfect it as you go along. It's not true with everything in life, but with content for social media, that is. And here we are, the first podcast. And
Great.
I'm used to being behind the camera, so this is a little strange and
You
weird
look good
for
in
me.
the camera, Yaakov.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No
It
problem.
means a lot.
Yeah.
So I think what we're just going to do is pretend like there's no camera here and just have a conversation.
Go for it. Yeah.
So let me introduce who I'm sitting with over here. This is Pesach Woznica. I've known him for 8 years approximately.
Something like that, yeah.
And he runs a very reputable accounting firm here in my neighborhood. And he's actually my accountant. And we're here to talk about, I want to hear about your journey. And I want to hear maybe about some hurdles that you've been through along the way. And because there always are.
Yep.
And want to talk about some of your successes and what you think attributed to it. And I want to go through everything. How much time you got?
I have my next meeting at 1 o'clock. I have to be back at the office.
Oh, perfect. So we have an hour. Awesome. Fine. So tell me a little bit about what inspired you to become an accountant in the first place.
I'll be honest with you. I was not inspired to become an accountant. I wanted to be a rock star musician, but I knew that I needed to make a living. So I was in college, and I actually started taking different courses, and I actually liked accounting the best out of all the courses. And that's when I started, warming up to it. So I guess it was early on in the stages of school that I started liking it, and all my friends would come to me for the answers in school and for tests, and I was good at it, which is an important thing because in order to excel at any given profession, it's a very important thing to feel like connected to it and feel that you're good at it. A person being good at something and a person liking something, they usually go together. So that's kind of what happened already in school. And then I moved on. I took the exams, and here I am, 18 years later, running a big accounting firm.
And where'd you study?
So I went to York
CPA.
University in Toronto. I took a regular accounting
Part of my
degree.
ignorance, CPA is the accountant's degree, right? It's a degree? Or
So it's actually not the degree. It's you get an accounting degree, and then you get licensed. So I'm an American licensed CPA, certified public accountant.
North American as in Canadian or USA?
USA.
Okay, cool.
And I became a US CPA even though I'm a Canadian citizen because I knew that I likely was not going to end up in Canada. And
at the time you thought you were going to be in New York?
Most likely somewhere in the States. I don't know why I actually thought that, but I had a hunch. I guess it had to do with, no, it was before I met my wife. A Canadian accountant, the way Canadian taxes work is that if you're a Canadian citizen, you don't have to report your income. If you're not a Canadian resident, then there's not that much to do for a Canadian Canadian accountant as opposed to a U.S. accountant. It's much more worldwide, much more versatile.
Because when you leave the U.S. and you live somewhere else, you still have to pay all those taxes.
Yes.
The Canadians, they don't hold on to you.
Yeah. So I really didn't know where I was going to end up. I actually didn't know if I was even going to use the accounting degree. From all the things that I was exposed to in college, it's the thing that interested me the most. But I didn't, leave college and then start my own accounting firm. It actually evolved over time, and I'm very happy it did.
A lot of what we're doing here is I'm speaking to the service-based industry. So people that are providing a service. And one thing I find very unique in the service-based industry, which actually I'm in too, as a video producer, I run a video agency, I run a service. And what the unique thing about a service-based industry is that you're selling your time. Whereas in tech, you're selling a product and
right.
e-commerce.
We're not selling widgets. We're selling services. It's a whole different
We're going to
thing.
get to that. Right? You mentioned. So when you're selling your time, it all starts with you.
Right.
And I know my dad's an accountant. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
Okay. And also my granddad's an accountant on my mom's side. Yeah. My mom. Well, that's how my dad chose to be an accountant.
You have it in your blood too. No, after this
but
podcast,
I don't know
you're
how
going to go back to
add,
school.
though.
You're going to become an accountant. That's it.
I don't even know basic math. So my dad's an accountant, and when he started out, I know he was doing tax returns for, his neighbors and friends, and then it sprouted from there. He actually got hired out by a firm. He didn't build his own. He's working for
which is what most accountants do. Most accountants don't end up starting their own firms. They work.
But you did. So now let's get into that. So what happened next? You got your degree. So, now you're like, okay, great. What do I do?
So actually what happened is I worked for my dad. He's an accountant. He's a Canadian. At the time it was called CA. They switched it to CPA also because Canada usually follows America. But really he's a Canadian accountant. I'm a US accountant. So we moved to Israel. And 6 months in, it was actually a friend of mine who wanted to get some tutoring work. That I started tutoring him in basic financial statements, bookkeeping. And he said, you're a CPA. You should really be using what you have because it's like you have to work hard to get. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, you're right. So I put up an ad and I started advertising to do tax returns for people. And it was all over then. I remember the first calls that I got, it was on my cell phone where I was in Aish, in the old city.
Okay.
And I was so excited the first time a person called me. You know what? I had not a clue what I was doing. I was trained as a CPA, but actually what you learn on the job is
very
way
different
more
from what you learn in college.
Yeah, so you'll learn how to do tax returns. You'll know the tax laws, but then as it relates to the specific type of client that was reaching out to me at the time who had specific needs, I had not a clue what I was doing. I looked back at some of my notes from when I started, and it's like laughable, like the stuff I wrote, but it's also gratifying to see like how far I've come, know? So
there's no better learning than actually learning on the job.
Yeah. Now that's the thing. It's a little bit crazy what I did because most people are scared to just jump in and start, providing the service, even if they're trained to do it. Usually they like to get apprenticeship for a while, really feel confident for a bunch of years. I'm a risk taker. I just jumped in and it was a little bit young, wild, and crazy. But that's how I learned. And
this goes to what we were saying at the very beginning of the session when I hit record.
Yeah.
And I was saying start before you're ready.
Right.
If I would have waited till I was ready to start a podcast and I had the name, I don't even know what I'm calling this. Right. I had a couple of ideas, but I don't know.
Right.
Should we call it Citron Secrets? I have no idea. The Citron Show. Or
the Citron Show.
I don't even know what I'm calling it. And I'm starting it right now. We're sitting here having a conversation because the best way to learn is learning on the job.
Yeah, you learn the fastest, the quickest. You propel yourself.
Jump
way
right
forward.
into it.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Obviously, you don't want to be a wild cowboy. You have to know what your limitations are. Like, I'm not a client who reaches out to me and he starts asking for tax advice in an area that I'm not qualified to assist him. I'm not going to just jump in and say, yeah, let's go for it. That would be a mistake. So you have to keep it balanced.
Sure. To piggyback on that, the start before you're ready thing doesn't work with everything. If you're creating a product, especially in the health industry, and you start before you're ready, you have a lot of issues. Right.
Exactly.
You don't have FDA approval and you're going right in. That doesn't apply to everything.
Yeah.
You got to use your noodles to figure out.
But you don't want to be too conservative either because you're never going to get anywhere.
Exactly. Perfectionists, right? They say, what is it? Perfection is the ultimate killer of good. Something like that, right?
I've never heard this, but the concept, yeah.
Because if you're a perfectionist, oftentimes you're not putting out the things that you're trying to do, or you're not actualizing your potential in certain areas.
Exactly.
So what happened next? So you had your first project. How did that go?
Yeah, no, it was tax returns, individual tax returns. I don't even remember if that first call became a client or not, but I remember I had my laptop. I was working from home. And I was doing everything myself, literally, it started because I put an advertisement up. That's how the person knew to call me, paper advertisement in the local.
Paper ad.
Yep. Paper.
What year was this in, out of interest?
It was about 17 years ago or so. So, yeah, a while ago. In the 90s.
My bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
I was 13 at the time.
Not the 90s, I'm sorry. No, 2000s.
Yeah.
I'm better with numbers than that.
Delete it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a long time ago. I was studying in Israel at the time, in a different field, but it was more for study purposes, to expand my knowledge base, and so I had to fit that in together with starting to run my own business. So I started just in between, lunch break, pumping out the tax returns. Then I started eventually coming home early. It was mostly in the night hours that I was able to put in. until I saw that this was really taking off. And then I had to cut down. I had to switch where I was studying, and I really changed up my schedule. And then I started working full days, like 9-hour days. But my day started at like 3 o'clock, which is not the healthiest thing. You know, like long term, that was never going to work. And it didn't, which is why I eventually, started working much earlier on in the day.
Your day ended at midnight because you were doing
because
US
I
taxes
started
while you were in Israel. So you were doing it for you.
No.
You were working for people here, or you were working for people
I was
over
working primarily for people in Israel, U.S. citizens. As a U.S. citizen, you have to report your worldwide income. Technically, I could have started working 9 o'clock, had a regular 9 to 5 work day. But I chose to start because I was juggling two things. A lot of times when you're starting your own business also, it works like that. You need to pay the bills, and you don't know from your own business if you're going to be able to pay the bills. So you hold on to a regular job, and then on the side, you start running your own business until you see that it's bringing in enough cash flow to hold its own, and then you drop your other job. Right.
It's the side hustle life, and then you hope that grows up into something.
I see that from a lot of my clients. That's what they do. They start side gigs, and it starts off small until they see that it's really
or it falls apart.
Or it falls apart, but then they keep the regular job. So, they still have a way to pay the bills.
They're not in trouble.
Yeah.
For anyone watching this that is not familiar, there are massive American communities in Israel that are, I'm living in Israel. I'm a U.S. citizen, and I barely speak Hebrew throughout my day because I live in an American community, and I feel like I'm in Israel because there is an Israeli environment to some extent.
And you have to pay your bills.
Exactly. The government mail you have to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, my social life is pretty much all in English.
Right. We live pretty much in an American hub
a bubble
in Israel.
Yeah. There are kids growing up that don't even know Hebrew.
But it's a big bubble, which is great. The kids are marrying each other.
I like the bubble.
Yeah,
I like the bubble.
Me too.
It's cool.
Yeah.
I don't see anything wrong with that. It's not going to pop. So tell me a little bit about what your business is currently. Like what do you do? What's your,
Yeah. So currently what we do is we provide U.S. and Israeli tax services and some accounting services as well to U.S. citizens living both in Israel and all over the world. And the Israeli tax services that we provide, we have a U.S. and an Israeli division, is obviously, not obviously, but 99% people living in Israel. That's, again, because Israel's actually like Canada, right? If you don't live in Israel or you don't live in Canada, and you're an Israeli citizen or Canadian citizen, you don't have to report your income for the most part, as opposed to U.S. So U.S. is one of the few countries in the world that requires its citizens to report their income independent of where you live. So that's where our meat and potatoes. That's,
So if you're planning on moving out of the U.S., think about this. It's going to cost you a lot.
No. It may not cost you a lot. No, if you move
unless you get a really good accountant.
Yeah, no, it's very simple. I know it's not the purpose of the podcast, but basically, whichever country you're living, you're going to be paying taxes in that country for the most part, and you get a credit, on the U.S. side.
So usually, tax treaty, right?
Yeah, there's a tax treaty. So
besides for Social Security.
Yeah, it's not true. You could, as a U.S. citizen, you could still live wherever you want, pay your taxes where you're going to be living. For the most part, you're not going to end up, owing taxes to the U.S., so you shouldn't be worried about that.
But you do need to pay the higher amount of both.
Yes, between the two countries. But the U.S. taxes are actually pretty low compared to other countries. So across Europe, most of the European countries, Israel, Canada.
Israel probably has the highest taxes, no?
One of the highest taxes, yeah.
Wow. We're paying, 25% corporate gains?
23%,
but it's 25% dividend tax.
Yeah, well, dividend capital gains is 25%. There's a lot of tax in Israel,
When you open up a business in the U.S., you don't really need to know that much from a tax perspective.
Right.
I found that opening up a business here in Israel, I almost felt like I can join your team,
Right. No, listen, you showed me the Excel that you put together. That's really unbelievable.
I'm very proud of it.
Most
I appreciate
business,
you mentioning it here.
Yeah, most business owners do not do something like that, and they scramble. I was speaking to a business owner just this past week. He's making a lot of money, and he told me he's a mess. He's petrified of getting audited by the IRS. Why? For the sole reason he's not trying to evade taxes at all. He doesn't have good record keeping, And I put him in touch with a few good bookkeepers. But it's imperative for a business owner. I know this is one of the things that you wanted to discuss, but it's just coming to my mind now. Is when you're running a business, you need to be running a business. It doesn't matter whether you're selling widgets, whether you're selling services, what type type of service you're selling, you need to go to the basics, which is you need to be making a profit. If you're not making a profit, if your costs are spiraling out of control, there's so many business owners that they get into it and they get excited and passionate about what they're doing, which is great. You need that as well, but you also need those basics to know that you can pay the bills and that you're going to be left with a profit. Without that, then you should not be running a business.
You opened up something really big over here, because I preach this a lot. And this is especially in the service-based industry, right? A lot of service, like let's say a roofer or whatever it is, someone that's providing a service in construction, they're good at something and they start doing it for their friends, and they don't necessarily go to college for it. And then they realize, okay, I can charge for this. Right. All right. Like a lawyer will have gone to college and he plans to, but in any case, you usually start yourself. Right? Or you start working for a firm, but when you break off and you start a business,
it's a one-man show usually. Usually you don't go from like nothing to having 5 employees. It doesn't work.
And one question I ask people, and I know it's none of my business, but I ask them anyway because I care. Do you use the same bank account for business and for personal? Right. And I don't care if you have an LLC or if you have whatever entities you have. Right. Right. If you're like a DBA, right, you're doing business as whatever you call yourself, but really you're a sole proprietor. You don't have any entity. You still need to be having the separation of church and state. You cannot have them both come. Do you give yourself a salary? What do you mean? I'm the only person in the company. I don't care. Do you give yourself a salary? Right. Like, how do you answer that to your wife? Oh, I don't make a salary. Right. I just pull money out of the company. Right. So that's where when you're able to separate that. Yeah. And then
that's a basic. There's a lot of tactics that a person could use to help them be structured more smartly, in other words. But by law, you don't have to have a separate bank account. If you're starting out slow, it's not necessarily a terrible thing just to start off. Listen, if it's a simple thing to open up a US bank account, even not in the name of an LLC, you should do that. Just open it up and have everything business related in that bank account. It'll make your life a lot easier. Again, you're not required by law to do it. Most people who are starting out businesses don't have somebody to tell them that, So you can give a lot of business advice just from running your own business. Yeah. You've come a long way.
Yeah, well, actually, the idea of this podcast is that I feel I do have a lot to share. I want to share it through the medium of bringing people in that have been in the game much longer than me. Right. So that, it's not just, me sharing what I know. It's more I'm bringing in professionals that are going to share on a much higher level. And I have, let's say, 5 employees. You have 30 employees approximately. Yeah. So, you definitely have a lot more. You've fallen a lot more times than I have, and you've gotten up a lot more times than I have. And you have a lot to share. So, which I'm hoping to bring in Mati Weisner. He's my he's my budgeting consultant. He's
a world of experience. He's exposed to so many people,
Yeah. And also he saved me. Right. He taught me all of this. I was like, okay, I had one account. I was doing services. I was making whatever money. Right. If I needed to go to the grocery store to buy some food, I'd buy it at the same card, everything. And
the Yaakov Citron that I knew 8 years ago is a totally
2 years ago. 3 years ago.
Especially 8 years ago. Yeah. Totally different Yaakov Citron. Like I never would have imagined you would, be where you are now. And
thank God. And a lot of your help, and I appreciate it. Right, not just tax help. You gave me advice throughout the way, and business advice, and this is a thing that happens to me. Like I recently started creating content, and that's just one facet of the business, and things just come up. There's life, there's emotions, there's all this stuff going on, and sometimes you just you need to be away from the business. So can you share maybe an experience that you've had, and we don't need to get into specifics, but just like how you've dealt with it?
Yeah, sure. First of all, regarding what you just brought up, I think it's important to understand that when you start out your own business, you usually start out as a one-man show. It makes it extremely difficult to balance and manage the business when things come up that start taking over your life, whether it's an extra few hours a day or something much bigger. A crisis happens, somebody's in the hospital. If you're a one-man show, it's going to be difficult.
Always fires, and if you're the one putting it out.
It's very helpful if you're able to delegate. The more you're able to delegate, again, you can't do that right away, because if, the job that you're doing, the type of service that you're providing, I don't know if you're a dentist, there's only so much you could delegate. Certain jobs will lend itself to being able to delegate more, but wherever you are able to delegate and your business is making enough that you could afford to delegate, a lot of people will think, I'm not going to delegate because I'll make more money on my own by not delegating, because then I don't have to pay somebody. But it's not true.
Penny smart and a pound foolish.
Yeah, you could. First of all, there's a quality of life. right? Which directly relates to what you were asking me. But not only the quality of life, it's also the dollars and cents. In any job, there's a lot of things that need to get done that you don't need to do. You should not be doing those things. You should be delegating those things to free your time up so that you could speak to more potential clients, develop your business more.
I heard something beautiful. I don't remember who said this, but if you're booking your own meetings and you're doing all your own secretarial work, essentially you're working as a secretary. Your job is a secretary.
Yeah.
Okay, your boss is yourself, but at the end of the day, you're a secretary.
Right.
So if you think about it, all that time could be used to advance your business and think big and move forward.
Yeah.
Then essentially you're hiring yourself. Right, you bill yourself off. You bill yourself out at like $800 an hour.
Right,
and you're hiring a secretary for $800 an hour, right. 2 hours a day.
Right, it's crazy. It's crazy, but there's a lot of people that do that. And listen, if you don't have enough work to go beyond you, and you could afford to put in those 2 hours, it still may make sense because you want you. But at the same time, then let's get back to what you were asking me, which is things come up, right? So. First of all, if you're not a one-man show, then when things come up, it's a lot easier to deal with them, okay? Because you're not running. Like now where I'm at now, I have a staff of 30 employees. From an operational point of view, I don't need to be that involved. I'm more involved in the client intake, the analysis, consultation, putting out fires, but I have a great team, so I'm able to go away for a week. I can, something happens and the business will still continue to run. I remember when I started out the business, tax season came along, I was literally up until like 3 o'clock in the morning, starting from very early, and there was no room, no margin for error. Nothing was able to happen. And actually something did happen in our life at the time. Momo was born, right? And that was around when I had early stages of the business. It was crazy, Thank God I didn't fall apart, and I pushed through. It builds you, but you want to flex your muscles, but you don't want to break your muscles. You know what I mean? Now, that being said, even with my current state, and let's say a person who's a smaller business and only is a one-man show or small, things will come up, things will happen. How do you deal with it, right? So, there's no right or wrong answer. Everybody will deal with it in a different way. I find that personally, it's very healthy to have hobbies. You shouldn't. You should be very work-driven, and passionate about your work and put your whole self into it. But it shouldn't be your whole life. I think it's a mistake. You have some workaholics that just go crazy. They're, and it's all they do. I don't know. You're in my opinion, I would break. It's important. To have
you dedicate the time as if it's a meeting. From this time to that time, I'm going to go biking.
Well, yes. Let's say I go mountain biking. I love mountain biking. I play tennis, exercise. There's the physical exercise is an important thing as well. It releases the endorphins in your body. It's a chemical, and it actually does something. It makes you. I find that when I exercise and I have a more balanced lifestyle, you get better sleep. The same hour that you're going to put in doing work, you could accomplish like 3 times as much if you were not doing all those other things, and you were just like pushed, and you're on the verge of breaking. So, an hour.
That's an interesting point because oftentimes one will be so busy that they feel they don't have a second in their day.
Right.
Now, when you look into that day, what you're actually doing in that day, there could be things that you're doing that can take a lot quicker if your head is in the right space. Yeah. Yeah. And by space, meaning you create space for the head to be in a space.
Right.
Right. And your head is so stuffed with all the things that you need to do because you're not giving any. You don't have the headspace, and you don't have the peace of mind and the state of mind, the right state of mind to deal with it. As a business owner, you're constantly analyzing and assessing the situation and making choices. And if you're not fit, basically, to make the right choices because you're sleep deprived or you're hungry, then not only, like you said, it's going to take longer, but it's also you're going to make the wrong choices, and that's very costly. Wrong choices, yeah. We know we've all had it. We've all made really bad choices. Mm-hmm. Was there a situation where you made, a decision that cost you big time?
That's a good question. I actually don't regret any of the decisions that I've made, but there have been certain decisions. For example, there have been certain decisions that I've made that in retrospect it wasn't the best thing for the business.
Like maybe you've taken on a client with 6 red flags. And
Yes.
Then
Yeah. Here's a big one. You're starting out your business. This big potential client comes. A lot of times the client will make themselves out to be a great client, and they'll
there's
want
gonna be
you
tons
to
of
take
future
on.
work, and I know a bunch of people that
tons of connections, exactly, and it's there's going to be a lot of I have a lot of money. As an accountant, the person has a lot of money. That's usually there's more potential. The guy who's making $15,000 a year, there's not that much accounting work that you're going to need to do for them, right? So a lot of times that will happen, and especially, you'll be eager and you won't do your due diligence. I highly recommend, if you're in the service industry and you're looking to develop a relationship with a potential client, I made this mistake before, just taking on the client without doing, research. Somebody comes to interview, for a job, you want to speak to the references. Try to speak not to the references. Try to find your own references. Find out, the person's switching accountants. So that could be a very legitimate reason why they're switching accountants. But how many accountants has he had in the last, 3 years? If he's switching a lot, there's usually a red flag over there. A lot of red flags, So at the same time, you're eager and you're hungry. You want to grow your business, so you take on the client, right? So as you develop your business, though, and even not when you're in the early stages, sometimes it's smarter to go a little bit slower and take on the right clients, not just quantity, the most clients. It's not so simple, though, because when you don't have that many clients, you want to build up the momentum. So sometimes you have to take on, in the initial stages, clients that are not the ideal clients.
Okay, so have you ever been in a situation where you were with a client that was losing you much more money than you were gaining from the client, and you actually had to go ahead and fire the client?
Yes. Yeah.
How did that process work out for you?
Okay, so it wasn't only that we were losing money. There's also, like I mentioned before, the quality of life, right? You want to enjoy what you're doing. You're spending a lot of time in your day doing, running your business. You don't want to be dealing with a client that's extremely difficult and making you crazy, possibly even abusing you. There's abuse that can happen with clients.
And they somehow got your phone number.
I'm sure you've had this before, right?
Yeah,
and
no, absolutely.
They manipulate you, they abuse you.
Demands in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And then they go silent for 2 weeks, and then suddenly they're like, "Oh, okay, I need this the next day." You were waiting for them the whole 2 weeks.
Yeah. No, that happens all the time. I hate that, right? So you fire those. No. So obviously you're running a business. You need to protect your name. So I actually consulted with somebody how to do it. And first of all, what you need to be sure of is, are you losing money? A lot of times, a lot of business owners, they won't even know whether they're making a profit or not. So we have actually a pretty good time tracking system now. And before we had that, it was very difficult to assess whether we were making money. Were we spending 20 hours on the return, or were we spending 2 hours? So I would speak to my preparers, and I would, it was kind of based on feelings, what they felt and what they remembered, and that's not the best way to do it. So now we actually have a very good system. Client bill, they want a discount, we see how much time did we spend on the file. I know my staff are not wasting their time, so we could see. So what happens if, let's say you have a combination, that's the no-no, like you're losing money on the client and they're abusing you and they're making you crazy. You need to let that client go in a polite way, right? So how do you do that? So the advice that we were given is to let them know that it's come to the point where we feel, as your accountant, that we're not the right match for you anymore, and we'd be doing you a disservice to continue servicing you. It's not the best thing for you, and therefore we need to move on. It's been a great relationship. Thank you very much for all the work that we've done together. And right.
And do they push back when you say that?
Sometimes,
like, oh no,
yes.
I think you're great. You've been awesome. You've been available for me at all hours.
Right. This doesn't usually happen, but when it does happen, you need to be able to identify it, and you need to deal with it. The longer you go without dealing with it and just keeping the client, you're hurting yourself. You're hurting the business. You're hurting your employees, and you're hurting your other clients. Right? The 80-20 rule, when you spend 80% of your time with a client that's only bringing you 20% of your overall revenue, it's not healthy for the business. It doesn't make sense, I spoke to another accountant from another firm, and he said, that's one of the tactics, similar. But there's another tactic as well that he uses, which is good. You raise the price. You say, listen, your file is very time consuming and it's very demanding, and I'm happy to continue working with you, but we need to change the way we bill you. And instead of charging you this amount, we need to charge you this. So a lot of times what they'll say is, yeah, okay, I'm happy to pay it. Now, if the person is going to be paying you a lot more, then you have to make a business decision. Is it still worth it or not? Now, you could still, listen, the person doesn't have you on a leash. You're still entitled to say, even though, you could try it out for a year and see how it goes. And maybe, even though it's hard, but the person is paying you good money and it's worth it. Or you may decide it's still not worth it. Quality of life is more important. But at least it, goes in that direction. Of where you're steering the ship a little bit more. You shouldn't. Right. It's your business. You don't have to be, the one.
Don't get pushed around. You're the one. You're the boss. When people say it's like, when you run a company, you're not the boss. All the clients are your boss. And then I think it's a misconception. Your clients are not your boss. You make the rules, and to some extent, you have to make sure that you're keeping everyone happy.
Right.
But you shouldn't get pushed around.
Right. It's actually a balance. Yeah. Because on the one hand, it is true what people are saying. Like when you're running your own business, your clients are your boss, and you have to worry about your boss firing you. Your client, if you do a bad job, if you're not nice to them, if you're not professional, your client could fire you. But at the same time, hopefully you have, there's different types of business models. Sometimes you have a few large clients, and then they are really, like let's narrow it down. If you have one huge client, what is that essentially? Your employer. That's what a job is, right? Yeah. The opposite end of the spectrum is you have a ton of smaller clients, So if you're closer to that end or anywhere near that, you have a lot of clients. So you're running your own business. It's a much healthier status to be in, where you could afford to lose a few clients, People work for an employer and it's a great thing. And they have a great relationship with their employer. But yes, could their employer fire them? Yes,
Right.
So
Yaakov,
actually, could I just mention one thing related to one of the questions you asked? When things come, into your life, and how do you deal with it? So we talked about one area, which is an important area, which is the more you could delegate, the more that it's not on your own shoulders. That's very helpful. There's another area, which is really crucial, really important, and that is you need to be enjoying what you're doing. If you're doing a job where you're doing it because you're paying the bills, you're doing because, listen, it could be great. It could be, you could be making a great living doing it. But if you're not enjoying and you're not feeling fulfilled with what you're doing, then when the side things come up in your life that are not related to your business and they start taking over a little bit, they won't take over because you love what you're doing. You love your job, and you're still going to be able to get it done, and you're not going to feel like it's a burden. It's just as important, I would say, as as the other aspect of it that we were talking about. I feel that in my own right. Recently I started getting more involved with the clients, the initial intake with the clients. I'm actually doing the sales right now for the business. And I feel like the blood is coursing through my veins again. I'm loving it. I hadn't been doing it. I've been delegating to a sales team. And recently I'm doing it myself. I feel like it's the real value added that I have. It's the relationships with the client. It's like you go to a doctor, and you know what the sickness is. You don't know how to go about it. Or you don't even know what the sickness is. You need the doctor to figure it out. That initial doctor that looks at your situation, assesses your situation, comes up with a game plan, that's crucial. After that, the doctor gives over to his team, to the nurses, to the other doctors, to implement, But I need to be that initial doctor. And when you're selling services, depending what service you're selling, but it's specifically the type of service that I'm selling, tax advice, tax consulting, tax returns, I need to be there,
Right, 100%. Let's talk about this. The one unique thing about the service-based industry, which you just touched on right now, is people connecting with people. Mm-hmm. So now, if you're not selling widgets, like you said,
right?
You're selling a service. Mm-hmm. Essentially, you're selling yourself. You're the face of the company.
Right.
There are 30 people behind you to make sure everything's running smoothly and efficiently, but you're the face,
right?
And you should be the first person that they're seeing. So I find that something very unique with service-based industries, right? You'll take like examples from different areas, like a lawyer, a dentist, or we mentioned before, a roofer. You need to trust the person behind it.
Right.
You need to trust that this dentist is not going to gouge a hole in my son's mouth and he's going to be crying and scared to go to the dentist again. You need to trust that this lawyer is going to fight your case the best. You need to trust that this roofer is not going to give you a roof that lasts up until the winter, right? So you're trusting the person, whereas in other areas, in other industries, it's much less so. It's much, you don't care who's the guy behind Google. Right. You just care that, it works. The widget works, right? Right.
When a person comes to our business and they reach out to us, they've either, found us online through our organic traffic, through our website, or through our PPC campaigns, pay-per-click campaigns, or word of mouth. The best clients that come are word of mouth, because when they come, they were told by their friend, use Pesach Woznica because he knows what he's doing. Great service, professional service, a great team, etc., right? Now, what you said is true, but I would just like to elaborate on that a little bit. When they're coming, to me, they're coming, because they trust me and they want to make sure that Pesach Woznica, he knows what he's doing. But it's not just Pesach Woznica knows what he's doing. It's that he understands what needs to be done in order to get out a professional and accurate tax return. And in order to do that, it's not just Pesach Woznica. It's implementing systems, checks, procedures. And when a potential client is coming to me, or when they've heard about me, they're not just coming because they know I'm going to be sitting there preparing the tax return. It's actually the opposite. They know that I'm not a one-man show a lot of times. And they know that I have good systems in place, and that I'm, there's somebody reviewing, 2 sets of eyes checking the returns. They know that we have them covered and that we won't leave them hanging. And it's not just me personally, but it's who I am as a business owner, knowing tax returns and understanding tax returns and the systems that I've developed. That's what they're relying on, know. And that I would say is one of the big selling points. But again, you're right. That can't. I don't want to take that away from. I like to develop that relationship with the client initially. They want to know that if I'm the one behind all the systems, behind all the procedures that we have in place, so it's usually a reflection of who I am and my personality.
Right.
And there's something personal to that, and they want to know that they have somebody that they could work with. Not just a somebody, but also the systems, which is a reflection of me. It goes. I like to add. I'm a people person. I like speaking to people. I like assessing their situation, and it gives me life, and I love it.
Right.
I'm very much. So enjoying it.
I want to bring it all together over here, because we're talking about the service-based industry being people connecting with people, and we're also talking about how having a team behind you is a huge value. And I preach that all the time. It's a big selling point. Right. I tell people, when I'm onboarding a client, I say that we're working with a team over here. So we have a project manager that makes sure everything's running smoothly. Right. We employ the best people for each job. We have a script writer. We have an editor.
They need to trust you.
Right. But they're connecting with me initially. Right. And the fact that I have a team behind me makes them understand and feel confident that everything's going to run smoothly. Right. So I want to bridge that a little bit. Right. And because there is a gap. Why? Because when you start a business, it's just you, right? You are awesome at preparing tax returns. Right. Can you do it for me? Right. And then it gets to a point where right now you have 30 people behind you getting it done, and you somehow manage to infuse your personality into all of that. Right. Can we talk about a little bit, how we bridge that gap? Because I imagine there are people out there, not necessarily to become an accountant, maybe I'm saying maybe they want to be, a lawyer and they're in law school right now, or they already have a firm and they want to grow it, but they don't want to lose that personality aspect, that small team kind of feel or individual. Yeah.
Listen, each industry and service, different type of service that you're providing will have different limitations. For example, a tax attorney. When you're coming to the tax attorney and they're giving consulting and that's what they're selling, for the most part, that's their main service, it's going to be really hard to scale out because you're coming to the tax attorney, Preparing tax returns lends itself to having an ability to scale out and have a team behind you, If you're installing roofs, even more so, it doesn't necessarily need to be you. A dentist, you could scale out, you could be overseeing other dentists, So the point that you made, though, is a very important point, both from a personal level, When the client comes to me, it's me. I was the one doing everything, speaking to them, having the initial plan, understanding their situation, documenting and preparing their tax return, billing them, getting their signatures, filing the return from A to Z, right? So you need to, have a team behind you, or if you have a team behind you, you're losing that a little bit, I shouldn't say losing, but it's different, And there's also, not just on a personal level, there's also the client's expectations. Even now, you can tell the person, you can explain to them why it's better for them not just to have Pesach Woznica doing everything. At the same time, they'll be like, I know you, Pesach. I just want you to do everything, and it'll happen, And even now, even 18 years later, it could still happen, and it does happen. And sometimes that's not the right fit then, for that particular client. Maybe that particular client will specifically want to go to somebody who's a mom and papa shop who'll be there answering the phone, doing everything, for them. My father's business is more, the previous generation. He runs like that. They have a secretary, but he basically does everything from A to Z, and it has certain benefits, But overall, in my opinion, there's a lot of pros to the way we run our business, which is if, we have a baby, or if I'm in the hospital because I have knee surgery, the client's not going to be stuck. He's still going to be able to get the same service and the right service, around the clock. Not around the clock. We're not open around the clock.
Delete that.
Yeah. But you know what I mean. It's it is a gap, and it's a little bit challenging. Don't go from A to Z, overnight. It's a gradual process for any business owner. It's a natural, and you don't even have to think about it. It happens kind of on its own, as long as you move in the direction of delegating. Some people get stuck and they never delegate. And again, I shouldn't say stuck. It's a different way of running a business, and you could be very successful. One of the tax attorneys that we work with, he's very highly successful. He's a one-man show, Doesn't mean he's not successful, My father's very successful as an accountant. He loves what he's doing. The business model that we have is one that allows us and enables us to scale out more, which comes with its challenges. But I view challenges not as issues, but as challenges, which are a positive thing. If you approach a challenge,
you overcome them, you're one step higher.
Yeah, challenges are not problems. There's always solutions. You just have to come up with the solutions. If you look at them as negative things, then they will be negative.
Right.
If you look at them as opportunities to overcome them, to grow, to flex your muscles, not break your muscles, but flex them in a healthy way, then you'll be a different person. And you'll be a different firm.
I want to go back to the one-man show thing that you were saying. What I'm getting from what you're saying is that, or behind the words that you're saying, is that it really depends on what specific service you are, doing.
To a large extent, yeah.
Right? Meaning if you're a tax attorney, then in theory you could be a one-man show and still be very successful. Whereas, in another area, you're researching cases, right, class actions or whatever. You need people that are going to be doing a lot of legwork behind each project to make it successful. Right? So there's certain areas in certain industries, like a dentist, right? You need a hygienist. You need a, you need a secretary booking your appointments while you're in people's mouths. Yeah. Right? So in certain areas, you can't really scale, or you can't really be super
It makes it harder. Like, again, don't get me wrong. I want to slightly take back what even as a tax attorney and even as a dentist, you could hire multiple, tax attorneys under you, and you could scale out.
Right. I mean, on the flip side, where like by not hiring, you to still be like a wedding videographer, as an example in my industry, right? So I don't do wedding videos because it's not worth it for us as a team to create wedding videos. The amount of hours that goes into it and the amount we can charge for it.
It boils down to the dollars and cents, the profitability. If your profit margin is extremely low, then and you're only able to put in 8 hours a day, and it is what it is. Again, if it's service industry, not if you're selling widgets, but if you're in the service industry, so people are paying for manpower in the services. And if the amount that you're making per hour is not so high, then it's going to be extremely difficult to make ends meet. If you're on your own. Whereas if your billable hours are extremely high, like a tax attorney, certain, big doctors or whatnot, then you could do fine. You could make a good living, just on your own.
Right. But so what I actually explained to someone last week is this is a freelancer, and I told him when you scale and when you start hiring people, you have to take into account for each project, right? Because it's a service. The service is you're selling your time for money. So I told him, I said, you need to calculate the money versus the time that's going to take you.
Yeah.
When a project comes to me, I need to calculate the money that's coming in
Budget.
against money and time.
Right.
Meaning it's going to cost me money to have my team create this project.
That's what you call the cost. You have to see where your cost is going to be. And your cost is, it's funny, when you're running your own business, well, the way I look at it, and it's probably not correct, but I look at my costs as what am I going to have to pay my staff, plus the overhead. You have your tax software and whatnot. But in the service industry, for the most part, your cost is going to be your time, your staff's time. And again, your time is also. But then you have to put a dollar value on it. Like when you're a one-man show, you could look at it like your cost is zero, and somebody's paying you $10 an hour. You're making $10 an hour,
I actually pay myself I pay myself a salary that's fixed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't pay myself per hour. I should though.
Not necessarily.
No, I think I should.
You know what you could do? You could pay yourself a fixed salary, but what you could do to help you for budgeting purposes for projects, you could apportion a dollar value or a shekel value, whatever you call it, per hour for your time. And it doesn't have to relate to the amount that you pay yourself.
Right.
You could just, you could decide to pay yourself whatever you're going to pay yourself per month and still pay yourself even in months when the business is not doing very well, or even and pay yourself the same amount even when the business did amazing, But for allocating the right amount of hours, how much you're paying per staff, you should put your time in there as well to see if it's profitable. That's a good idea.
Yeah. So I want to go back because I'm still not done with this. The solopreneur,
right?
The solo
practitioner, sole practitioner. That's what they call it.
Yeah, sole practitioner versus the business owner, right? So when you have 5, 10, 20, 30 people working under you, and so you're saying to be involved in the sales aspect, is there another area? Because I would imagine this. Let's say as I don't know how dental the process works exactly.
Neither do I.
Right. So we're going to be completely ignorant in this example. So let's say a dentist will, the top dentist will spend whatever amount of time at each patient. Let's say.
Okay.
Right? And this way he has a finger on the pulse with everything that's going on. But not just that, he's infusing his personality into every aspect in the business. So no one comes to Dr. Jonathan Christenheimer without actually getting to meet him and experience him.
Right. And people will appreciate that.
Yeah.
Again, you limit yourself. It depends how big you're going. If you're really trying to scale out in a huge way, it's not going to be possible. If he's going to have a whole building, like, I don't know if any dentists have this, but a whole building of, dentists, with 40 dentists in there, they're not going to be able, what was his name? Dr. Christenheimer? What's his name? They're not going to be able to meet him. But the real
immigrant to the U.S.
Right. The real challenge in order to be able to scale out is to still instill your personality to all the clients and in the business and the logo and the branding. Somebody told me, what is branding? How do you define branding? When you're in the room and you're selling your service to a client, then you it's very easy to brand yourself because you are who you are and you're speaking to the client, you're telling them about you. Question is, when you're not in the room, how do you accomplish that the person will get the same messaging, the same idea, the same feeling regarding you and your business when you're not in the room? That's what branding is. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. On point. Yeah. Branding could also be when you're starting a podcast and you know who you're talking to, right? We're speaking to people that are in the service-based industry. They're either just starting out or they already have 10 employees and they want to grow.
Right.
But you don't know exactly what you're going to be saying to them and what flavor it's no secret that we're Jewish and living in Israel, but I don't want to this is for the general U.S. audience, and I don't want anyone to be looking at it and saying this isn't relevant to me.
Right.
So it's that's also branding. Figuring out what your identity is, what your messaging is. My pediatrician growing up, he had, I think it was 10 rooms. Okay, 10 rooms, and he'd have, and my wife hates this for whatever reason she hates. Yeah. And he would have a nurse go into each of the rooms and, do, the vitals and all that stuff and write down the notes that, I don't know, only doctors can actually read. Right. And put it in the folder thing. And then the doctor would come in and he would look at it for 3 seconds, get the whole picture, know your whole backstory, ask you a few things. And what's amazing was you didn't feel like he was rushing you in any way, but he was in and out in a minute.
Right.
and he averaged, I think he averaged about 60 seconds per patient.
That's crazy, but he's probably.
My wife hates it because she's like that doesn't make him a good doctor.
No, but if a person has a hush, if they have a real sense and a real feeling, they're really good at what they do. Like for me, when I review a tax return, I could review a tax return 10 times quicker than a much less experienced person, and I'll do it better in a lot of ways, than that less experienced person, because I'll really be able to identify with what's going on, what the situation is, and what.
It's actually a great segue, because one of the things I want to talk about, I scrapped the whole list. There's probably a million things I wanted to ask you, and
that's for podcast number 2.
We'll do a session 2. Yeah. So, how to charge more for your services is a very big thing in the service-based industry that people. That people want to know. There's this guy. He calls himself the Future. Chris Do, I think his name is. Mm-hmm. He has actually a lot of great content and a brilliant philosophy, which is he says something like, if you'll pay $3,000 for a logo, and it takes me 2 months, I spend 100 hours on it. Right, so I'm getting $30 an hour. How's my math? Was that good?
I think so.
Okay, good. Yeah. So it makes sense. I'm paying someone $30 an hour. He's a designer.
I told you could be an accountant.
Exactly.
We'll go back to school.
3 types of accountants, right? Those who know an accountant, those who don't. So I'm the third type. So it's like I'm the third type. So anyway, so he's like, so that will make sense to you. Like, what if it takes me 5 minutes?
Right. Okay. Right? It's awesome what you're saying. This is exactly what we've been working on.
When he says, should I get paid less because it took me 5 minutes?
No.
You're punishing me for doing it quicker?
No. That's the thing. In the service industry, this is what we've been working on with our business consultant, Ori Tzafir. He's great. I highly recommend him. And you're selling a service, but at the same time, the service is the service. The question is, how can you charge more for the same service? Right? So one way to do it is say, okay, I was charging you $50. Now I'm going to charge you $75. That's one way to do it. And again, you do. There is inflation. You have to keep up with the market. You have to be aware of what your competitors are charging. But you also have to be aware that, if you're charging the same price for the last 10 years, something's off. You have a right. You should be. You go to the store, your tire pops, and you need to replace your tire. There's inflation now. The tire's going to cost more. Your grocery bills are costing more. So your staff are costing more because they need to pay their grocery. You did?
I told you about it?
No, you didn't.
I was at the Puncturia.
Oh, yeah. And he told you that everything went up, right? And you were shocked at how much it
did
cost.
Go up, yeah.
I know. It's crazy, right? But it's not crazy.
Well, it went from dirt to 2 pieces of dirt.
Right.
They charge us nothing.
Right. But still, it's
not a commercial for him.
Listen, when the costs of living are going up, so then you're entitled to charge more. That being said, if you're able to provide the same service in a more efficient way, which means it's going to cost you less, but the end user is still receiving the same exact service, maybe even a better service because it's more efficient. You don't have to charge more, but you're going to be making more money. It's
value-based pricing. Is that sort of what you're saying? Where you're
I don't know.
You're selling the
fancy
value.
sounding. No, you're selling the service. For example, I'll give you I'm selling a tax return. The person comes to me. Yes, I'm selling a service, but ultimately what they want is they're giving us their documents, they're giving us their background, and they want us to prepare their 2021 U.S. personal federal tax return in a timely fashion, and it should be an accurate tax return, and it should be set up and structured in a way where they're going to pay the least amount of tax or get the highest refund possible. That's what they care about. So as long as you're able to accomplish that, if I'm able to do it in a more efficient manner where instead of it costing me $200, it's now going to cost me $100, I can still charge the client the same $300. They'll be just as happy. They have no idea what my cost is. And now I'm making $200 instead of $100 on the return. Right. That's the goal. This is
right. In your case, it'll be different. Yeah.
Right. But there's a lot of services that are like that. And the key, I would say one of the keys or the key, is in improving your processes, your systems, and automating. As much as you can automate, you're taking the human error, the aspect of human error out of the wherever you could take the human. Again, on the one hand, you want to have your selling service, so you need the human, but the personal. You want to keep the personal.
You want to automate as much as possible.
But you want to automate as much as possible because it'll make things more efficient, faster, and also less room for human error.
Right.
So we've been working on that.
We have 2 minutes left right now, and I want to ask you one thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazingly kind of you to come in here
No problem. My pleasure.
And
for you, Yaakov, you know.
No, and I
enjoy
appreciate it.
talking
This
to
is
you.
this is not really just for me.
Yeah.
This is for whoever is going to be watching this and benefiting from it.
Mm-hmm.
And would you take on a client that is currently in the U.S., right? Because you primarily work with the U.S. community.
We have
here.
clients in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
okay. So if someone was inspired by anything you said and
Mhm.
wants to become a client of yours, how
Mhm.
would they? How would they find you? How would they start? What would they do?
So they would reach out. First of all, they could visit our website. It's www.expattaxcpas.com. They could, first of all, visit the website, search around and see, and there's contact forms over there, or they could just email me directly. I would email the office at info@pwtax.com, or they could just Google my name.
And if they were listening to this podcast, they know that they're actually going to get to meet you and not be outsourced to someone.
At this stage in the game, you will be meeting me, and I'm looking forward to meeting you.
Amazing. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Yaakov. I really appreciate it.
This has been the I Don't Know What It's Called Yet podcast.
We'll come up with the name.
And thanks for watching.
Thank you.